today's class, we're actually going to be looking at ways in which not only we talked about listening skills last week, and we're going to be touching on that a little bit in more detail because it's actually, like I said, it's the #1 skill of successful students. So we're going to be touching on that. We're going to be also looking at how to kind of shift your motivation levels a little bit, as well as if you're the kind of student that just is not really participating in the classroom and a little bit shy and introverted, we're going to give you some tips on how you can actually deal with that situation. Because if you're not participating in the classroom, you're actually robbing yourself from a lot of the important material that you could comprehend. Okay, because participation is actually a key component to learning. Okay, so here's the agenda. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to look at basic and advanced listening skills. Okay, so again, a reminder, this is the #1 skill or attribute that all successful students possess. Okay, so it's worth spending a little bit more time on this. We're going to talk about how shy and introverted students can participate more in class. Because remember, if you can participate more in class, you're actually going to become a better learner. #3, we're going to understand how to build your motivation levels. Okay, and then we're going to talk about how you can figure things out to become an elite student. And then lastly, I'm going to give you some ways in which you can increase your motivation levels whenever you need to. Okay, so step #1 or slide #1 is let's look at some basic listening skills. Okay, and again, it's very important that you understand these the power of listening, because in our last class we talked about the fact that if you're not a good listener, you could actually spend a lot of time in the wrong areas, waste a lot of time, a lot of energy, get frustrated, only because you actually didn't understand what you needed to do. And this happens more times than I can probably tell you. Okay, so a lot of students, they come to class, but they're not actually in class. Their mind is somewhere else. Okay, so this is what costs them a lot of time and effort. So what you want to do is to develop your basic listening skills. Look directly at the person speaking, okay? And do not multitask. Now, the reason why you want to do this is because we touched on the fact that a lot of the listening that you're going to do has to do with paying attention with your eyes, okay? So you really want to do your best to look at the person speaking. Now, if you're learning online, you may not be able to actually look at the person speaking, but you may actually get other clues to improve your listening skills, okay? And those are nonverbal pieces of information that we had discussed last class, such as tone of voice, such as time being spent on subjects, such as visuals being used, such as detail, the amount of detail spent answering a question. Sometimes your professor will say, or your instructor, your teacher might say something is important. So all these things contribute to really, really paying attention, okay? Do your best to focus on the speaker. So what I mean by this is don't get distracted. Put away your cell phone, put away anything that sort of distracts you from focusing on what the speaker is saying, okay? Because if you don't do this, it's going to cost you in the long run. Because what will happen is you may spend 5 minutes getting distracted, or even 2 minutes, let's say, or even, let's say even 30 seconds, you get distracted for 30 seconds. Well, in that 30 seconds, you may have missed out on such valuable directions, such important directions, and then you'll probably, because you missed out on those directions, you probably spend more time trying to figure out and understand what you had to do, and then you might get it wrong. But if you had actually concentrated for that 30 seconds, you probably would have had a much better result, and the whole assignment or your studying process would have been much easier. Okay, listen with an open mind. Okay, so a lot of times, and this happens to a lot of intelligent students, by the way, what happens is they believe that they know what the instructor is going to say. They already believe that they know what's going to be said. So what happens is they tune out. And when they tune out, they actually haven't heard what the instructor actually is trying to say. And as a result of that, the students will do things their own way and not the way that the instructor wants them to do. And then when that happens, when they submit their assignment or their homework or whatever, they don't get a good grade only because they thought they were supposed to do it one way, but the instructor wanted them to do it the other way, and then that's why they end up losing grades. And again, this happens to a lot of intelligent students. So if you are one of those students who's naturally smart and intelligent, you want to make sure that you put that, that type of thinking aside and really focus on what you need to pay attention to, okay? Ask questions to ensure that you understand what is being said. Asking questions is one of the best things you can do to keep yourself focused during the class, as well as get more clarification, okay? So very important to ask the right type of questions just so you get a better understanding of the material. And again, we talked about paraphrasing back what you're hearing, just to check back for understanding. So these are basic listening skills that you want to implement to make sure that you kind of grasp what is being said. And again, these listening skills will not just help you in school, they'll probably help you in all other areas of your life as well. So I thought what I would do is I would also go a little bit more deeply into it and talk about advanced listening skills. So these are the listening skills that the majority of the population doesn't know, okay? Listen for what is not said. Okay, so this is really interesting. Listen for what is not said. And a lot of times people are communicating by what they do not say or do, okay? And the reason for this is because 90% of communication is not the words that we use. So try to listen for what is not being said. So here's an example of something that is not being said. So let's say you look at somebody, and as they're walking towards you, a stranger is walking towards you, okay? And they're very well dressed. They've combed their hair very nicely. Their clothes are freshly ironed. The clothes, you can tell, are quite expensive. The material is quite good. They haven't said a word to you, but they're already communicating a lot of things even before they even talk to you, okay? On the other hand, let's look at somebody who is a little bit scruffy looking, somebody who wears very dirty clothing, somebody who maybe hasn't showered and maybe smells a little bit bad. Or let's say that this individual, their shoes that they're wearing have not been polished, and they're all tattered, right? Not that this person is bad in any way, because you never know, right? They could have maybe just come from a really difficult situation or something like that. But what I'm trying to get at is that these two people are communicating something to you. I'm not deciding whether it's good or bad or one person is better than the other. That's not what I'm trying to get at here. But what I am saying is they're communicating something without actually saying a word. Okay, and this is very important to understand, because if you can understand, you can get that communication happens a lot without the words, your ability to listen and grasp concepts at a deeper level goes up dramatically. Okay, and we talked about this, right? Repeat what the person is saying, but repeat it in your mind a lot. So a really good example is when somebody tells you their name. Somebody tells you their name, and if you're somebody who forgets their name easily, just say their name in the back of your mind a few times, like 3 or 4 times, and there'll be a better chance that you'll remember what their name is. Okay. I also do this when I've been given really important instructions or directions. So a lot of times I have meetings with other instructors and other members of my team, and if I don't have, I usually like to write stuff down, but if I don't have anything to write down, what I do is I just repeat that important piece of information in my mind a few times, and then when I get to a place where I can write it down, then I do. But just by saying it in my mind a few times is really valuable. It helps me remember stuff. Lastly, don't assume that you know what is going to be said. A lot of times people just say, oh, this is what the person's going to talk about. But don't assume that, because you never know. It could be something completely different. Also, don't actually imagine or think where they're going with the conversation or what you think they mean, because it may not be the case. And a lot of times people just make these assumptions that people are going to talk about certain topics and they mean certain things, but it's not always true. And then lastly, with this point here, remember that everyone sees the same things the way you do. Okay, and as I teach this more and more, it's very interesting because I'll teach something to a student, and then all of a sudden they'll come to me and they'll ask me a question, and the question is based on an assumption that they made about the directions that I gave, which I never really intended for. So by understanding that people don't always see things the same way as presented, you will get a better I guess, understanding of the fact that sometimes when things are told to you, there are various ways to interpret those things. And by understanding that there's various ways to interpret things, you'll become a better listener because you can see different points of view. And when you can see different points of view, then you can get more insight on a certain topic or concept and things like that. Okay. And one thing that I think is very valuable is commit to asking a great question. So if you can, at the end of every class, if you can commit to asking a great question, your listening skills will go up dramatically because you'll know that, hey, I have to ask this question, so I better listen carefully now. Okay. And honestly, this is one strategy I implemented, which was commit to ask a great question. And, I cannot overstate how valuable this one technique was, because what it did was it not only allowed me to get clarification on the subjects, but because I asked such a great question, or I tried to ask a good question, people around me just made an assumption about me, and that is that I'm very interested in the material, I'm intelligent, and I'm following along very, very precisely with what's happening. And as a result of communicating by asking those questions, by asking a good question, I used to get a lot of opportunities by my instructors and my professors. And at the same time, I also made some good friends because other students could see that I was on the ball and I could actually understand the material. So I always had a better experience and had more opportunities by asking really good questions. And again, one thing I would really recommend is do 90% listening and 10% questioning. But when you do question, you got to make sure that question is bang on. So I've had some students, they'll just ask questions because it's time to ask questions. That's not a bad strategy, but the problem is if I repeat it, or if I'm teaching a concept and they're asking me a question based on something I've already spent a lot of time on, and it shows that the person hasn't been listening, that asking a question actually can hurt the student. Because then if they ask a question that I've already spent time talking about, and they ask me the same thing over again, they're communicating that they're not paying attention. Okay, so you really want to do more listening, 90% listening and 10% questioning, which I think will really help you. Okay, and one thing I would say is one great question is much better than 5 average questions. So don't think you have to ask a lot of questions, but try to ask at least one good question per class, and I think you'll start to notice that your situation at school will be much better. Okay, and again, this requires exceptional listening skills, which is your goal. Okay, so hopefully this has made it very clear to you, and you want to understand that there's different levels of listening, and the better listener you are, just overall the better results you get and the better relationships you form, and the less time and effort you spend doing tasks, and the better results you get too. And lastly, the more fun and enjoyment you get because you understand what you need to have done. Okay, so let's talk about this, how shy and introverted students can participate more in class. And I've put this in here only because I've noticed that there's a lot of really intelligent students, but what happens is they don't actually do that well in some of their classes because they don't actually speak up. So it's important to understand that if you're somebody who's introverted and shy, doesn't like to speak up, you're also communicating something. And you're communicating that, and sometimes, let me take a step back. Sometimes you're communicating something you don't want to communicate. Sometimes you're communicating that you're not interested, and maybe you are interested, and that's why you're kind of quiet. But if you're not saying anything, you're not contributing to the material, a lot of times people will take the assumption that you're not paying attention, or you're not interested in the material, or you're daydreaming, or something negative. Why? Because you're not actually, it doesn't look like you're taking an interest in the material. So participating is actually very valuable and can help you very, very substantially. So if you are scared to participate, then what you want to do here is you want to actually practice asking questions. Because there's a great quote that I heard a while ago, and that is, success is on the other side of fear. Okay, so if you're scared to ask questions in class, which many students are, then that's more of a reason to ask questions. And this is a counterintuitive strategy, and we'll talk more about counterintuitive strategies later on. But if you're scared, what's going to happen is you're eventually, let's take a step back here. But whenever you're scared about something or to do something, what can happen is that the thing that you're scared of just gets more and more scary unless you actually do it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because a lot of times students, they're too afraid to ask questions and participate. And so they'll think when they get older and they take the next course, then it'll be easier. Well, it actually becomes even harder. And then when they graduate and then when they're in the workforce and they don't ask questions, they think, well, eventually I'll get the courage to ask questions. But by that time, it gets harder and harder and harder to ask more questions, and things start to become very difficult. So practice asking questions now because you're afraid to ask them. Okay. Another way to participate more is to practice and prepare ahead of time. So maybe you can read the class slides. Maybe you can add your own experiences, right? And not just the slides, but maybe the textbook material, maybe the notes that the instructor has brought up. Maybe you read them, add them to your own experiences, and then have a discussion about them. Maybe you can write down questions ahead of time. So when you're in the classroom, you can actually ask these questions. But the key here is that if you're participating and you're getting involved with the material, you're actually communicating a lot of good things to your teacher. Okay. But remember, you don't want to overdo it. You just want to make sure that you're asking really high quality questions, and even one question a class is sufficient. But by doing that, you're actually showing that you're interested in the material, and your instructor will really appreciate that, and the other classmates will probably thank you as well because they probably have the same questions that you did. And you're also benefiting because you're getting more clarification on the concepts. Another way to do this is to answer questions of other students. So for example, let's say a student has a question. You could put your hand up and say, I think I know how to answer this. Or is this the correct answer? Or try to contribute to what other questions are. And by doing this, it's showing that you're actually taking initiative and you're trying to add a lot of value to the class and to the concepts being taught. Now, very, very few students do this, but the ones that do this, I really notice them as a teacher. I really notice them, and I really appreciate that they're trying to get involved and help other students. Feel free to give your opinion, and again, it's okay to disagree. And sometimes people will say things and no one will agree with them, but I respect the fact that they're sharing their opinion because everybody's allowed an opinion. Okay, and sometimes when you share your opinion, it's good. Just you want to make sure that it's respectful and it's part of what has been discussed in class, and it's it relates to the material that has been discussed in the classroom. Okay, and then complete your assignments. Now, completing assignments is very valuable because when you complete your assignments, that means that you've actually, hopefully, you've understood what you had to do, and by completing your homework and your assignments, you now have a body of knowledge that you can go back to and discuss that in the classroom. Okay, so completing assignments really makes it easier to discuss things in the class. And then number 6 is take care of yourself, right? So make sure you get enough sleep, right? Like, it's very hard to participate if you're on your table, table snoring away, or you can't stay awake and you're doing the head nod because you just can't concentrate. So take care of yourself, okay? And then also make sure you eat, you drink water, whatever you want to do, just so you can actually be present and be aware during the class. Because a lot of times if you're not taking care of yourself, it's very hard to participate and concentrate in the classroom, okay? So now we're going to talk about motivation. Now, motivation, this is something that kind of escapes a lot of people because they actually think that motivation is something that just kind of comes up to them, and it's kind of like the wind, right? They think that one day it's very windy, so then it's kind of like having a lot of motivation. Some days there's no wind, so there's no motivation. So they describe it like that, okay? But the reality is that if you are not somebody who's motivated, then you need to figure out how to get yourself motivated. Okay, and if you don't figure this out, you are going to really struggle, not just in school, but in many, many areas of your life. So what you want to do is you want to understand what the definition of motivation is, okay? And the key point that I want to make here is that motivation is an emotional issue, not a logical issue. So the reason I mention this is because you need to start understanding and experiencing emotions in a certain way if you want to get more motivated versus giving yourself logical reasons to actually do something. So we take most of our actions, okay, to avoid feeling bad and to start feeling pleasure. So this is, if you can understand this, you can understand how to motivate yourself. So a very good example is a lot of times people will, a lot of students, I've noticed this, is that, you know, the first week or so, or the first month or so at school, a lot of students don't always seem that motivated. They go to class and they do what they're supposed to do, but they're not always motivated. All of a sudden, after the first assignment that goes wrong or the first midterm that they don't do well in, all of a sudden their motivation goes up. And why does it go up? Because they experienced a lot of discomfort or pain with a bad grade. And that, in order to avoid that feeling bad or feeling that pain, they now all of a sudden want to take more action, and then they are paying more attention in the classroom and they study harder and they do their homework and all that stuff. It's because they experienced what it felt like not to do well, and so they don't want that feeling again. Okay. Now, another way to motivate yourself is actually to feel pleasure. So what you can do is, if you are lacking motivation, you can actually imagine what it's like when you actually, you know, get the grade that you want to on your exam, for example. Or imagine what it would be like, what it would feel like if you got your degree. Okay. Or imagine what it would feel like, not only did you get your degree, but you got the job you always wanted because you performed better in school. So these are two ways that you can get yourself to get motivated. But here's where things get very, very interesting. And you can actually drive up your motivation like tenfold if you can combine the two. So how do you do this? How do you actually get yourself to avoid feeling bad and feel pleasure, to actually get yourself motivated? So let's take a simple example. So let's say, you know, you have some homework to do, okay? So what you can do is you can actually predict what will happen in terms of predict all the negative things that could happen if you do not get your homework done. So let's say you got to write an English paper, okay? So you don't feel like doing it, so your motivation is low. So what you can do is you can say to yourself, if I don't do my English paper, if I don't actually write it, what are some bad feelings that I'll get? So you might think about it and you might say, well, I'll feel really bad because I'll probably fail, and then when I fail, my parents will get really upset with me. And then I'll have to actually take English all over again because I probably didn't do well the first time, so then I got to repeat it again. So now I have 2 years of English, which is something I didn't really enjoy. Another thing you could say is that, well, you know what, I'm working right now and I'm paying for my education, and if I don't do well, I'm going to feel so bad that I wasted all this money on this course. Another one could be that you might just not feel good about yourself because you knew that you could have done better, but you kind of are a little bit upset with yourself that you didn't do so well. So these are the bad feelings that you could imagine if you don't take the action that you want to do. Okay, so just imagine them and write them down, and we'll give you an exercise on how to do that. But just imagine all these feelings that you might experience, these negative feelings that you might experience if you don't take the action that you want to take. And then you couple this with actually feeling pleasure. So let's say you did get your homework done and everything was done the way you wanted to. Then what I would do is I would actually reward myself for it. So maybe things you could do is maybe call up a friend, maybe go for a walk. If you like to exercise, go to the gym. Maybe you could watch your favorite TV show. Maybe you could, treat yourself to a coffee. Maybe get some ice cream. I don't know. But the key here is what you're doing is you're getting yourself to feel bad for not taking the action, and then giving yourself something that you enjoy for taking the action. And as a result of that, what ends up happening is you start to associate motivation to the things that you need to take. Okay, so one of the most powerful ways you can do it. So how do we do this, right? So I give you an idea of how to do it, okay? But the reality is that you just want to use your imagination and think of the painful and also the pleasurable experiences that you're going to experience in the future, okay? And by doing this, you'll really get your emotions locked in to get yourself motivated. And remember, it's the emotions that you want to get locked in and not so much the logical rationale, because you're dealing with your subconscious part, not so much the logical part of your brain. And again, we'll talk about the subconscious and the logical part in the future classes. Okay, so we'll do a motivation exercise as well. Okay, so this is what the motivation exercise looks like. What you want to do here is you want to think of an action or behavior you need to take, but are not feeling motivated to do it. Okay, so again, describe all the pain and the discomfort you will feel if you do not take this action today. Now, here are some ways you can do this. Consider the following. What would you do in terms of your career? Right? So how would this, if you don't take the action that you need to take, how would it affect your career? How would it affect your health? How would it affect your relationship with yourself? How would it affect your self-confidence? How would it affect your self-esteem? How do you think others would see you? What would happen to your financial situation? So these are the things you want to consider if you don't take action today. Okay, there could be other factors that I haven't even put on here, right? So for example, one might be if you don't take action today, you might just get really, really stressed out because you won't have enough time tomorrow, and that's really going to, increase your anxiety levels. So that could be another one. But write down all the pain and discomfort you would feel if you don't take action today. Okay, and then what you can do to make it even better and to motivate yourself even more is project this into the future. So how would you feel in 1 month, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and even 25 years if you just don't take the action that you need to take? Okay, and just by imagining this and thinking about it, hopefully you're starting to feel some emotion inside of you. And as a result of feeling that emotion, you might feel more motivated. And then what you want to do is then after you do this, you're probably not feeling too good, okay? Which is actually a good thing, because if you feel great all the time, you probably wouldn't change your behavior. So at this point, you're probably not feeling that good, again, which is a good thing. But then what you want to do is then you want to actually start feeling good, but you want to feel good in the right way, and that is by describing all the pleasure and joy you will feel if you do take the action. And again, you want to consider the same things, right? Consider how your future career would, like what would happen? Would you get that career? How well would you be at that career? Maybe you would increase your health. Maybe you would feel better about yourself. Would your self-esteem, your self-confidence get better? Would other people start to admire you more? Would you actually have a better financial situation? So all these things you want to consider if you actually describe the pleasure and the joy for actually taking the action that you need to take, okay? And then again, you just want to project it into the future in the same way that we described above. Now, I actually took this from a book that I read when I was not doing well in school. And the name of the book is Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within. I believe that was the one. And I just did this exercise, and man, this just got me motivated. And so I'm just sharing it with you right now, because if you can do this for yourself, you can get yourself to get motivated to do all the things that you know you should do but don't always do. And eventually, when you start doing this on a regular basis, start taking the action on a regular basis, it actually becomes more and more easy to stay motivated, because then you start to see the results, and then you feel all these good emotions on a regular basis. And remember, it's the emotions that will get you to keep on taking the action, not the logic and not the not the analysis behind it. Okay, so let's look at elite versus average students. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to just talk about a couple of concepts. And that is that elite students are able to figure out solutions to problems that they may not expect or plan for. So elite students are just good problem solvers, okay? They're good listeners, but they're also very good problem solvers as well, okay? They usually find a way to succeed and to obtain great results. I'm not too sure if you guys have seen things on my YouTube channel, but I've actually interviewed a lot of my previous students. I'm actually in the process of doing that right now, actually. And a lot of them, they have this find a way to succeed attitude all the time. Like they just find a way all the time to succeed. The average students, they have this thing called a victim mindset. And what happens is they actually just kind of give up when things don't work out for them. And they just blame everybody else and all the external circumstances, and they don't actually get the job done. So what you want to do here is that you do not want to become somebody who has a victim mindset. Okay? Because if you have a victim mindset, you're probably going to shut down and give up. And when that happens, you're going to get poor results. You want to be an elite student, and that is somebody who finds a way to get things done. So here's an exercise that will help you to think like an elite student. Okay? So I'm not going to give you the answers to this, but I want you to go through some of these situations which I'm going to show you, and I want you to think about how you would be able to fix these solutions by thinking like an elite student, which is what would you do and how would you find a way to solve these problems? Okay, so let's get started. So I title this How to Stop Being a Victim. And the reason I titled it this is because I'm going to share with you a lot of challenges that many students have. Okay, and the ones that really do well, they've all found solutions to these problems. The ones that don't do well, they just gave up and they weren't able to find solutions to these problems. So here's some typical solutions or problems that students face. The first one is that your ride to school is usually not on time, and you consistently arrive late to class. So now your instructor has told you not to bother coming to class if you arrive late. What do you do? Now, I'm not going to tell you what the answer is, but a victim is probably going to not really do anything about it and just give up. Where somebody who is a top student or a top performer, they're going to come up with a solution. So I want you to think of what's a solution that you would actually implement here, okay? Because I want you to think not like a victim, but like a high-performing student. Here's another one. You may have other obligations, okay? Therefore, you have much less time to do your work on your assignments or study more than most students. So how do you keep up with your classes? So again, victim students are going to say, oh, I can't get it all done, it's too difficult, and they just will give up. High-performing students will find a way. So what do you think high-performing students would do? So think about this one. Number 3, your friends distract you from studying and doing your homework. How do you handle this? So how does a victim handle it? They just continue hanging out with their friends. And they just kind of say that it's my friend's fault and that's it. Now, how does a high-performing student do this? Again, that's your homework. Number 4, you don't feel like working with your group members, but you know you will be great in how much you contribute to your group. What will you do? So this is a very common problem. Sometimes you put in teams and you put in groups and you don't like the people you're working with. So what do? Again, the victims, they'll just take a bad grade and they'll just kind of be very passive and not really do anything because their excuse is that I don't like my group members, so I'm not going to do anything. Top students, on the other hand, they do something very different, and I'd like you to think about what they would do. Number 5, you're exposed to certain software to hand in, you're expected to use certain software to hand in your assignments, but you don't know how to use it. What steps are you going to use to solve this problem? Again, victims, they're just going to give up, and if they don't get an answer right away, they're just not going to hand in the assignment and just blame the software. Top students are going to figure out what to do here, and again, that's what I want you to think about. Number 6, you found out your printer broke and your assignment is due later that day. So how will you handle this? Again, how would a victim handle this? They would probably not print it out. They would probably just not hand in the assignment and just say, it's my printer's fault, it's not mine. And so they would just give up. Other students who perform better would probably do something different. And lastly, you're not motivated in one of your classes and you realize that you're missing more and more lectures and not turning in assignments. How do you fix this problem? Again, if you're a victim, you probably wouldn't fix the problem. You would probably just continue doing what you're doing. But if you're a top performer, you would actually do something, and hopefully you can come up with what that is. Okay? So in summary, this is what we did today. We looked at basic and advanced listening skills. Again, this is the number 1 attribute or skill that all successful students possess. Then we looked at how shy and introverted students can participate more in class. And again, this is important because if you're not participating in class and you're actually not getting involved, you're communicating things that are probably not very positive, which may kind of affect you in the long run in a negative way. Number 3, we talked about how to build your own motivation. Number 4, we talked about how to figure things out. So this is more about the victim mindset and how to let go of that victim mindset. And number 5 is exactly what I said. It's about eliminating the victim mindset here. And and that's it. Okay, so that's kind of what we discussed today. And hopefully you got a lot of value from today's class. And we will see you next week. Okay, have a great day. Bye-bye.